my first stop was like with the No Means No campaign. It was purely fueled by anger. Now, finally, I can say a lot of my active citizenry, be it pushing to end sexual violence, pushing for women's rights across the board, pushing for Pan-Africanism, is coming from a place of love.
In today's episode, I speak to Adelle Onyango, a Kenyan media personality. And during our conversation, we address topics of a sexual nature that may be disturbing or triggering to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the World Health Organization's #No Excuse podcast. I am your host, Guni Dias. Adelle, many of our listeners may be meeting you for the first time. So just for our listeners, Adelle Onyango is a renowned Kenyan media personality, radio host, poet, film director, and activist. You've been recognized globally by the BBC, OK Africa, and even as a jury member for the WHO's Health for All film festival. I'm so delighted to have you on the podcast. So welcome to the #No Excuse podcast, Adelle.
Thanks. I'm very excited to be here. Obviously, my touch point with WHO was the film competition, which was incredible. And so to be back with you having such a powerful conversation is like my pleasure to be here.
Something that has been consistent really along your career is that you've always used your voice and your platform to speak up for what matters to you. Have you always been like that?
Yeah. Yes, I have. I think it's very, what would I say? It's very normal from the family and the environment I grew up in, because if you meet all the women in my family, they're loud, they're outspoken, they have very strong opinions, and you are groomed by what you see. So that becomes your normal. And I think even away from all the women and like directly to my late mom battled breast cancer for, over 10 years. And it was a time where like having cancer was like taboo. Don't talk about it. You could get fired. And she would just like actively talk about it. She would push for change, would help other survivors in Kenya get access to funding for their treatment. She would rock her bald head when like now I have a bald head and it's like 2025 and it's still a thing. But you can imagine back in the day, it was like, what are you doing? Like if you're sick, hide it. And so I guess like seeing that just made me have a less intimate relationship with shame. And so the things that women are shamed into silence for, I don't subscribe to that train of thought. So I will just like speak. Honestly, there are times I've tried not to speak up. Like I'm just like, okay, Adelle, not now, Adelle. You have so much on your plate. Just keep it moving. And I'm like, nope, I have to speak up. So I think it's the normal for me.
You also have been very open about being a survivor of sexual violence. That's not an easy thing to do. And I think that also speaks again to your courage. And from my research on your work, it has also shaped some of your work, that is, be it in poetry or the film. At the time this incident had happened, how did you find the courage to turn something so painful into a source of strength?
Honestly, it was just anger. I couldn't see conversations online. Like, I think that's one thing I can see that has improved. I couldn't see conversations about sexual violence. I couldn't see other survivors. Yet I knew firsthand that this was happening. And so I think the first couple of steps that I made, even in like speaking up about, my first stop was like with the No Means No campaign. It was purely fueled by anger. Now, finally, I can say a lot of my active citizenry, be it pushing to end sexual violence, pushing for women's rights across the board, pushing for Pan-Africanism, is coming from a place of love. And this is like the first time. So it's kind of like weird. So even when I speak up, I'm not really angry anymore. I'm just really coming from love. But at the beginning, for a good number of years, I was fueled by just pure anger.
I mean, that's usually a very common fuel to people who speak up. And that transformation into love, I think, is also a process that takes time. Is that something that triggered that transition from anger to love?
Oh, that's such a wonderful question. To be honest, I think it was a lot of therapy work that I've done. So both talk therapy and like alternative therapies that have handled where the trauma is stored in my mind or was stored in my mind, and where the trauma was still stored in my physical body. So even when I sit in like circles with other women's rights activists, and a lot of the conversations, people could phrase their words as it's doom and gloom and there is some terrible things happening to women. I'm just like, that kind of sound of like, there's hope. There's so much love. Look at us. We're here. We're having this conversation. We're in unison together. We're having real impact. And so I think once I did the self-work and I just kind of went back inside, the anger just kind of like went away or was healed. You've got to feel it for it to like say, okay, it served its time and now it's on its way.
Right, because serving with love doesn't mean that the issue is not there or that is not important. It's just the way you go about it, right?
Yes.
So you mentioned your campaign, No Means No, and I think it's really raising awareness about consent. And even you linked survivors in this whole initiative, you linked them to psychosocial support, is that correct?
Yes, yeah. So how No Means No started, so the first stage was like taking all of these stories from survivors and translating them to visuals that people could see, and like maybe it could spark just self-reflection or introspection rather. And when I started it, I think the only social media platform at the time was Facebook. I remember what happened after that is, because I'm Kenyan and I live in Kenya, and I was doing this while in Kenya, but I went to high school in Botswana, and the school I went to, we had like very many students from different countries and cultures. And when we shared No Means No, all of those people were now maybe in uni in the UK, in the States, etc. And they were sharing like, hey, this is what I saw happening in London. The nightclubs have this posters in the bathroom, and this is a signal if you feel unsafe, like maybe you guys could replicate. And it was people like sharing, this is what we're doing in Botswana, this is what we're doing in South Africa. So it was really so wonderful to have that discourse. But I remember at the time I was seeing a therapist, and I just could see the tangible outcomes, or like how that was helping me. And I did it in a very, in Kiswahili, we say jua kali, in a very like not organized way. I just like called two psychologists I knew, and I was like, do you have a phone number? Great. And I would use my Facebook page to connect survivors to these phone numbers and kind of like say, okay, you call at this time and you can talk to her for an hour, and you call at this time and you can call. And it was obviously like, it was great at the time, but when you look at it from like project management, when you go in wanting to fix something, I was trying to be superwoman and I was just like burning out. So I was like, we need to fix the police. We need to fix healthcare. We need to fix, social cultural norms. We need to, and it just felt like this problem is so big. So then I said, okay, where do you want to focus? And it was in psychosocial support. And so throughout the pandemic, under my initiative, we launched like a free group therapy program, and we got about 3 psychologists come in. We had 1 curriculum developer, and we created this curriculum, and we run it for 4 cohorts actually, for women in particular areas in Nairobi to come and go through a free group therapy program for a couple of weeks. And to be honest, it was impactful, but what was very difficult and still is very difficult is to get access to funding. But even with that, we managed for 4 cohorts to take women through this. And we had a fundraiser that was purely on social media, literally telling people, if you can forgo having lunch and give today and give 100 Kenya shillings to this, like it doesn't matter if you have 100 shillings or 1,000 shillings, we're all going to say as individuals, we're going to help survivors get to this. Imagine that the power of individuals is what fueled 4 cohorts. And so it is something I'm still passionate to keep doing. But I think that just spoke to where systems fail, individuals still have that goodwill and want to help. Yeah.
You are having an impact not only on individuals that want to contribute, but individuals who are going to receive that support, who are going to receive and feel like they're being seen. But I think that there's this issue of sustainability that is a big problem in this sector. From your perspective, what would it take for governments or even NGOs and international organizations to ensure that these services for survivors are not just a one-off? Because it's amazing that just on your effort, you managed to do 4 cohorts. But we all, I think, know that this is not the responsibility of one individual. It's a system that needs to support them. And so looking at the system, what do you think needs to be more sustainable? How do we tackle this issue?
Yeah, that's just such a good question, especially for governments, and especially for governments in Africa and specifically my government, the Kenyan government, because I feel like because we go into conversations with international organizations and we go into those conversations looking for aid, right? And always being on the receiving end. That's one. Number 2, I find it hard to believe that, for example, my country, Kenya, does not have the capacity and the capability to run a program like Safe 247, which is the program, the free group therapy program. I do not believe that we do not have the capacity or the capability to run that ourselves across our different counties, and even look at tweaking the curriculum so that we start tackling social norms and adding a chapter of that into our national school curriculum. I do not think for such a thing, we need to talk aid or we need to look for funding from the outside. The conversation that should be happening is technicalities. How do we adapt this into the national plan? How do we scale? How do we translate it into different languages? Because we have like over 40 tribes. How do we make it accessible? So I truly believe a lot of African governments are really stuck in the cycle of being so aid dependent. We've seen how risky that is because the global funding space is changing drastically. And over a couple of hours, massive change happens that impacts millions. And so it is not good business for us to be aid dependent. And African governments, there is this, they remember women's issues when it's election time, because the numbers say you cannot ignore the youth, you cannot ignore women, right? But all of a sudden, after election time, they forget. So women are used as mobilizers. Women's issues suddenly matter. conferences are had even around sexual violence, but when they're in power, it doesn't matter. One good example is now when we talk femicide, we have to push for national policy to even recognize it as a crisis. We have to push for, and we being women, we have to push for justice for the cases of femicide. We have to use digital activism. We have to be reaching out to lawyers. We have to be reaching out to community-based organizations, etc. So there has to be an attitude change. Women's rights and women's issues around safety has to matter. And the last thing I'll say is when we look at the international landscape, global issues are trendy, which is terrible. So it's August 2025 as we record this. There's a global issue now that is trendy and another that is not trendy to invest in. I wish we could change how we approach funding for these issues and stop looking at what's trendy, what's hot, and start remembering, oh my goodness, there are actual lives behind these issues.
Now I'm sensing a shift. You went from strong activism to, in your activism, where you're going into prevention. How do we shed lights on issues that could be taken ahead of time? And your current work, for example, your short film that is, I think, shown also into schools, also podcasts, that is a hub for African stories. What do you think stories can do, especially when it comes to prevention and changing how people think about, say, consent or mental health or other topics that you think are going to help people not be in these situations?
Yeah, I mean, I just love stories. I love stories because when I tell you a story of my experience, Guni, there is a very little chance of you misunderstanding me. I'm explaining to you my lived experience. If I come, though, alternatively, and tell you, let's take the term feminism, right? The meaning of feminism has been corrupted, has been changed. And in those spaces, using the term feminism could be seen as an insult. Is it right? Absolutely not. However, if I tell you a story of my lived experience as an African woman, be it a good experience or a challenging experience, you understand it. You don't even need any terminology. You don't need to know anything other than, oh, I hear you. I see you. What would I do if it were me? Oh, hang on, I've never thought of that experience. So I'll give you an example. I once worked at a media house where, and it's still the case today, even as of this morning, I was reading an article of sexual harassment being so rampant in media houses. And because back in the day, this was a couple of years ago, that data came out, the media house decided to do sexual harassment, open conversations to sensitize the staff on what exactly is sexual harassment. And during these open talks, like as women, we were talking about different things we do. So for example, I was saying how even if I take a taxi from a taxi app, I always share my ride. Like it's automatic. It's not even a choice. It's something I do automatically. And I check if the door is like, will it open again? I check like you're even trying to like scan how the driver looks. Who is the driver? Sharing things. And all the men, when we were telling our stories as women of all of these things we do just to get to work safely and get home safely, they were in shock. And they said, damn, I've never actually thought about that. They were like, I don't even think twice when I get into a taxi. I didn't even know you could share your rides, And that's the power of stories. That's the power of stories where all of a sudden the lived reality of someone else, good or bad, expands your perspective. And you don't have to have terminology to say, hey, I feel really bad that Guni has to do all of these things. Or if Guni is doing this, that means all the other women I know are doing this. Something's wrong. Why do they have to do this? And stories spark empathy. I think we don't have enough empathy and compassion. If you look at conversations around sexual violence now online, it's heartbreaking. Sometimes I'm like, did we make any impacts here? What's happening? It's like we're at ground zero again.
Yeah, we're still talking about the same things.
Yes. And you still have to teach someone to see you as a dignified being as a woman, which is crazy. And I just feel like stories have the power to bring back empathy, to bring back compassion. Even for me, the process of recording stories for my flagship podcast, Legally Clueless, expanded me. I've sat across people who have a different belief system than me, be it religious. And I have been able to see how your truth, Guni, my truth as Adelle, don't have to fight. They can coexist, you know? And so it's really on a personal note, even just expanded me and made me appreciate alternative views. And I think that's the true power of stories, because without stories, we get so caught up in our little world. And the more we're in that world, the more even harmful truths remain and get cemented as truths, no matter how violent they are.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And we've seen this, be it in trainings, be it in conversation. And I think that's the essence of this podcast as well. It's to be able to bring people who bring different perspective on the topic. And so not only do we want to raise empathy, but also raise a shift in behavior, shift of thinking, as you said, like, oh, if they're talking about this, it means it resonates with a lot of other women or other survivors, be it men or women. And so I want to ask you, why focus on women? Is there most of your content or conversations, media, art forms have put women at the center? Why is that important? And how do you see that focus helping communities and societies as a whole?
You are absolutely right. I think before I used to sometimes hide away from it and try and be more, I was doing a poor job though, and say, oh, okay, like, let me spread my wings, let it not only be women, etc. And there's something about hitting your 30s where you're not interested in performative anything. And I was like, you know what? I really love women and I just want us to live a good life. I'm going to dive in, you know? And I think it's number one, the first answer is it's what I know. It's my lived experience, and specifically as an African woman. And I know it in terms of sexual violence. I know it in terms of societal expectations that create limiting beliefs for women. I know it in terms of financial independence and what that can do for women. You know, sometimes we talk about, especially in the NGO space, when we talk about like ripple effect, we're like, oh, if you put money into the hands of a woman, there's going to be a whole community that gets it. That's great. But I'm also talking about the ripple effect of if you watch a woman living a true, authentic life that is free of societal expectations, right? You as the woman watching, you start saying, hang on, so I don't have to be doing this thing. I can choose different, like I have options. This is great. And I think for me, having experienced that in my personal life and acknowledge that I have options right now that my mother didn't have, that my grandmother didn't have. And the reason we are able to have those choices is they made sacrifices that are allowing us to do it. So my thing is like, how can I make sure that they're all women, and with a specific looking at African women, it's a culture I understand, and there's an oppression in that culture. How do I make sure the women have enough examples of liberated African women around them across different ages, right? How do they have access to expertise from other African women, be it on health, be it on fitness, be it on the things that you're doing that could make your body feel better? And the end goal is how do we raise a new generation of shame-free women? Because the shame is gifted to us, and this is across, it's not just an African women thing. Shame is gifted to women violently when they're girls, and you carry it through your life. You have kids because you're ashamed not to. You get married because you're ashamed not to. You don't go for a certain job. How do we let go of that? Because even as we fix all of the issues that harm women, how do we make sure that on a social front, on a cultural front, women are aware that they have choices? How do we preserve those choices as well? You know, when you just know, like you start working on something and you just know, this is actually what I'm here for. This is what I'm meant to be doing.
Love that. And, as part of our listeners, most of them are aid workers, managers, and government representatives who play a role in shaping a safe environment where the aid sector is there to serve without doing harm. And these individuals who are listening are part of making that mandate a reality. The essence of speaking up is part of your branding and is part of who you are. In that perspective, what would you tell them so that not only do we create a safer environment, but an environment where survivors are supported?
I think it's number one, there has to be a mindset shift. You have to see the communities you serve as stakeholders and partners, right? They are not incapable. They know what's wrong. They probably even know the solutions. So once you change that mindset, you automatically will start listening more. And perhaps then your role has evolved to be more of creating an environment that enables the communities you serve to connect, to innovate solutions, and then you help scale, right? I think a lot of times communities that are suffering whatever different spectrum of issues, they're not seen as stakeholders. They're not seen as adding any value. They're not seen as knowing what's wrong and how to figure it out. And there's some organizations who have even gone a step further and changed the terminology. You don't say beneficiaries anymore, you say partners. This is very important so that your mind really starts to see value in the communities you serve. The other thing is, I think we honestly have to audit the effects of colonization that are still alive in our funding structures and decolonize that space as well. We like to think of colonization as this event that happened in a time period. It's an event that has only physical violence, but that is not true. There is structural violence that started back then and still continues to date. Being from the continent, I can tell you that for sure. And there is a very colonized way we look at funding structures, a very, very colonized way we look at community-based organizations in different African countries. So we have to then say, these structures that we have, who created them? Who do they serve and why? And really be humble in that process because the structures are still very colonized. The other thing that also needs to happen is to also not, would I call it tokenism? So don't look at African change makers and grassroots community-based organizations and champions. Do not look at them as tokens. So when you have forums and summits, these Africans are not there to just fulfill a quota, right? And to tick a box to say, this forum was inclusive because we had 10 people from the global south. Even the term the global south, I hate those terminologies. So if you have the summits, yes, of course, make them inclusive, not just in attendance, but also in value, also in sustainability, also in how you see these people you're inviting. Are they partners? Are they stakeholders? How are you making the systems that provide value to them more accessible to them, right? Do these summits have to happen overseas? Perhaps not. So I think we really have to be honest. If we want to do good, and if we're in this space, we tend to all play a little watchdog role while we're solving global issues. We first have to watchdog ourselves and be like, this structure doesn't benefit who we claim to be serving. We need to radically shift that. And to be honest, there's not enough time left for that to be done, because there is an awakening now. You see international organizations constantly being held accountable from different African countries. We need to see each other as partners. The systems still hold very colonial structures. What do we need to change them? That honesty, I think sometimes it's uncomfortable, obviously, because it's a painful truth. But I don't think we can make any lasting impact if we don't, call a spade a spade.
Look at you ending the conversation with a massive mic drop and a call out and a watchdog statement. I love that. I think it was necessary. And I think that this is why we wanted you on the show, is that not only are you able to bring also the voices of some African stories, but also the view of it. And I think it's very timely. Thank you so much, Adelle, for speaking up, for inspiring us to speak up and to continue your work on this. We really appreciate you.
Thanks, Guni. And this was so wonderful. And I just think even having honest conversations like this is such an important step. And so you're an ally. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you have any feedback or questions, feel free to reach out to us to prseah@who.int. Until the next time, goodbye.